Tansei, welcome to Soul Medicine Ancient Psychologies for Wellness. I am your host, Dr. Carly Fellner, psychologist and member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. As always, feel free to pick up what fits for you and to leave what doesn't. I'm just here to present a different way of understanding mental health and wellness. This podcast is not intended to provide or take the place of professional advice. If you or someone you know is in need of mental health supports, please reach out to one of the many resources available in your area or to a trusted professional. I am so excited to have one of the Kitiaya who mentors me, Wisug Richard Wright, here with us on Soul Medicine today. Richard is a member of the Leech Lake Ojibwe Indian Reservation in Minnesota. He was raised by his paternal grandparents in the village of Onigum. He left the reservation the day after high school graduation, entered the U.S. military, and served 3 years as a paratrooper assigned to the 2nd Airborne Division based out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. After his discharge, Richard entered the University of Minnesota with a major of general studies and a secondary in Indian studies. He also holds a degree from the St. Paul Seminary, the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minnesota. Richard is a licensed alcohol and drug counselor with the Minnesota Board of Behavioral Health and Therapy. Richard applies his theology to the study of Ojibwe Makundawe spiritual beliefs, focusing on the nature of divinity and the relationship between Creator and the world of the bear. Richard currently works for the American Indian Family Center of St. Paul and the Indian Health Board of Minneapolis as an elder in residence. He is married to Evelyn Wright with one child, Jay Wright, who is a computer science major currently working for investigations with the Wells Fargo Bank. Richard is using the teachings of rituals and traditions of Ojibwe Cree ancestry. This comes with a teaching to not diagnose in English methods, but rather uses Niji Moen Miwinja. This is a personal reflection to suggest to his people they can return to the rituals of their tribes and seek out elders and other helpers of the tribe to maintain balance in life. Richard is the author of The Way of Our People, weekly inspiration for American Indians in recovery. Richard's book can be purchased through Hazelden Publishing and is linked in the description of this episode. Uju Wisug, I'm so excited to have you here with me today. One of my mentors and the Kitiaya, who has taught me over the years about many different things. And today we're going to be speaking about understanding addictions from Inuak Indigenous psychologies. So welcome, Richard. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Miigwech, I just recently had a birthday on May 6th. I turned 76 years old. I was actually born in a Indian Health Service hospital, 1949. And the hospital, I think it was about 46 miles away from where we lived. So we didn't have access to the hospital as it was when we talked about prenatal care. My mother just went to the hospital when she felt pain. So the birthing pain. She raised me to be, I think, more in a traditional sense because she practiced a lot of the herbal medicines that we're beginning to find out more about even today. A lot of times, if we got injured or if we needed some kind of medicine to heal a lot of our scrapes and burns and things like that, she went out in the field and she just picked the medicines there and come back and use it on us kids. So we grew up in that way, not having access to Western medicine. We never really lived in a house as you would define a house to be today. The places that we lived were more tar paper shacks that were very mobile. We moved around the reservation quite a bit, building these tar paper shacks and followed just the bounties of what we needed from the lakes or the woods or something. But an example would be harvesting wild rice, where we would travel to a lake and set up a tar paper shack, and then we would just harvest the wild rice for about 2 weeks, usually in August. And then we would move to the fish camps, which was another area, and we'd stay there from October till the ice froze on the lakes. And then we would move that camp to the deer camps. So there was always some kind of movement, being mobile in that sense, or nomadic, if you want to call it that. But living in a house just wasn't something that we were accustomed to. But eventually, we did settle down in a house that was abandoned by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that had their local governor there that oversaw the activities on the reservation. They left the buildings there. The hospital that I talk about that existed in Cass Lake, where I was born, was built, and the hospital that existed in the village of Onigam, where we spent most of our time, it shut down. And those were the days of tuberculosis. They built that hospital there to handle the TB cases for the American Indian people, which really experienced a lot of that. There wasn't any real economic capabilities on the reservation, and so my dad picked up on a program that was provided by the Bureau of Indian Affairs called Relocation Act, which was started about 1934, which he took advantage of when I was about, maybe 7 or 8 years old. And he signed up to go to Chicago. And so the family was pretty well big then. By that I mean my mother had 10 of us kids. Yeah. So they moved to Chicago. And somehow I just knew I wanted to stay on the reservation. And so it was arranged that I would stay with my paternal grandparents. And her name was McCoonts, which means little bear. Her English name was Frances Wright. And she raised me up until I turned 17 and graduated from high school. But my grandfather, he experienced a heart attack when he was 40 years old. He used to smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day, Pall Mall. You know, those are the ones that don't have the filter. And so he was somewhat disadvantaged. So I really became his arms and legs, but he taught me a lot. And he taught me how to net the fish and set the net and repair nets, make nets. We didn't go to the store to buy what we needed. Everything was made from that he just extracted from the woods. Like even the floats we cut out of wood, we just carved them out of wood. And the sinkers, what he called the sinkers, which were actually the weights that pulled the bottom of the net down, were actually oblong rocks that we found on the lakeshore. And what they refer to today is that nylon. We actually would use the birch bark from the dogwood and peel it from the stem of saplings, and that was really strong. It was stronger than rope. And that's what we used to tie the weights down and to tie the floaters to the nets with. So there was all kinds of work that involved just living. And so we grew up on fish. I grew up on fish, smoked fish, boiled fish, things like that. Same with the deer camps and the wild ice harvesting. We made our own poles. They made their own boat. He made his own boat to go out in the lakes with. He called it a flat bottom because it wasn't built like the canoes. It was made steady so he could take grandma out there with. And she was usually the one that propelled them around, pulled them around. So it was much more stable for her. But he also talked about grand medicine, and grand medicine involved those ceremonies that the villagers would attend periodically, whether it was to address people that were sick or they were near passing away. They always brought together people and offered to stay with that person until they passed away. There was always somebody there performing some kind of just being there, being available if they needed something. And sometimes they would sing on the drum and they would talk and in their own language. A lot of times I wasn't allowed in some of them ceremonies, but I would sit outside of the room and listen to them anyway. Right? No place else to go. It was dark outside. Yeah, but a lot of healing took place traditionally in the historical ways. the shaking tent ceremonies that he talked about, and just even the physical medical needs of some people in the villages, which really helped my mother, because when she had me, like I said, they didn't have access to prenatal care. So when she went to the hospital to have me, they found cancer in her breasts. And of course, they did some real radical surgery back then. They wanted to take them off surgically. And she said that she wouldn't do that. And she actually used her sense of spirituality and need for to take a look at alternatives to that Western medicine. That she wanted to talk to a medicine person to see if the medicine person could help. And she went to four different shaking tent ceremonies before that medicine person agreed to help her. And he extracted that cancer from her. He took it from her. And when she went back to the hospital, um, the doctors, they couldn't explain as a reason why the cancer had went away in the Western way of thinking about how they were taught to deal with medicine and help that cancer either go away or to live with it. In this case, it was taken away from my mother. In that whole process, she had, at one point, she had been driven to the hospital, and she got in a car accident. And doors, of course, they didn't have seatbelts back then, but the car rolled and she fell out and the car rolled on top of her. She had a experience where she saw herself, she was rising above the car looking down at her, and where she laid underneath the car, and she had come to a place, she says, I didn't want to leave there. That's how intense what I was experiencing was so spiritual. But I thought about you kids, and then I saw this person, and that person spoke to me in my language and told her that Marion, that was her name, Marion, we have to send you back because there's something we need you to do. So reluctantly, she came back and she entered her body again, their physical body. And eventually, the wreckers, they called them back then, they came and took the car off of her and then took her to the hospital. And she was always wondering what it was that she was supposed to do, because that voice had told her, "There's Marion, there's something I need you to do." And on her deathbed, when she passed away, she says, was talking with her, and she says, I'm not ready yet, son. There's something I need to do. I said, Mom, you did. You raised 10 of us.
Yeah.
It's time for you to go home. Yeah. Yeah. So she left us. And you know what is really spiritual about this is she passed away on September 27th at 8:05 in the morning. September 27th at 8:05 in the morning is the same day, not the year, but the same day and the time that I quit drinking. I was in a bar at 8 o'clock in the morning, September 27th, and I had a whiskey on the bar. And I needed that whiskey so bad. I could feel it burning as it went down my throat. I knew it would take away the sickness. And then something came over me and said to me that if you're going to stop, you have to stop right now. Not later today, not tomorrow, right now. So I got up from that bar and left the drink there and walked out of the bar. September 27th at 8:05. And that's something very spiritual. Very spiritual. Actually, the experiences that I share with people about addiction, back then it was primarily alcohol. Now it's a lot of other different kinds of drugs. But for me, it was the alcohol. Prior to me stopping that drinking, I had went off into the woods where we lived, and I actually was using that tobacco, and I actually asked the creator to take me. That's how bad I was feeling from binge drinking. I would binge drink, and for sometimes for months at a time. People who drink alcohol know that experience, that pain that we have, our When we don't have it, we go into sweats. Our chest is hurting and our head hurts, and we're just constantly in cold and hot sweats. It's a horrible place to be. It's so horrible for me that I didn't want to live that way anymore. And so I went off into the woods and I asked Creator to take me home. I don't want to live this way anymore. And I actually went out twice. The first time that I went out and I do this periodically even today is I just go out and sit. And I sat next to some poplar poplar trees. Those trees are actually very they grow really fast, rapidly. And it was at a time when the buds were just starting to come out to sprout new leaves. I sat in that grove of poplar trees, and I sat there actually for 2 days overnight, just one night. And the second day I was there, I heard this screech owl. If you ever heard a screech owl, it sounds like a woman that's just screaming, literally, which really scared me.
Yeah, I bet.
Because I didn't know. And so I left, but later I came back and went to that same spot. Actually, that same spot that I went to is where my mother went to pray and to ask for help when she found out she had cancer. She took me there. She said, I came here and I cried, son. I cried because I didn't know if I was going to be able to take care of you. And so I went back to that same spot where she sat and cried. And I don't know how long I sat there, but all of a sudden I heard this horse galloping towards me, running really rapidly. And I looked off in the distance and I could see this white horse in it. And the rider was an Indian man that was dressed in white buckskin. And he was carrying a lance, a spear, and he was coming at me and he was pointing that spear at me. And so I got up and I was watching him come closer to me, and I saw that his intentions were that he was going to spear me. So I started running around those poplar trees, and he followed me, of course. And then eventually I entered a thicker area where I didn't think that horse could go. Then, after a short while, I took off running because in the distance I could see a drum sitting in a clearing, and on the drum was a drumstick, just one drumstick. I somehow, in my way of thinking, I knew if I ran to that drum that I would be safe. And as I was running, that horse was still following me. And I looked up in the sky, and the moon was full. And then all of a sudden, the moon started to spill golden liquid. It fell on the ground and it came towards me, right? It took place of that horse. And when I got to the drum, I got on the drum and something told me to start singing. And so I did. And as I started to sing, that golden fluid from the moon retreated when it went back, climbed back towards the sky, and I went back into the moon. And then I stopped singing, and then it started to float again towards me. So I started singing, and it retreated. And that was the pattern it did. And eventually, what I figured out is as long as I kept on singing on that drum, I was safe.
Yeah.
But what I didn't realize is that at some point I had fell asleep, and that was a dream that I was having because I woke up from that dream and I went and talked to an elder that I knew. His name was Gigag Kamikan, which means prancing horse, right? Ojibwa, or the horse dances, rears up on its hind legs and is legs kick and he's just prancing around. And I talked to him about that, and he says, well, you had a vision. And that's when he talked to me about that word. He was saying that Nichimo and Miwinja. He said, what something's going on with you? What is it? And I said, I drink. I drink a lot. And I don't want to do that anymore. He said, well, tell me more about the direction that that horse came from. And I said, well, pretty much what I can figure out is it came from the south. And he said, well, yeah, I kind of figured that because that's the death door, right? South is a death door. And it chased you towards the north. And I said, yeah. And I said, drum was in the north. And he said, well, that's where the Giwei Din, that winter spirit, is there. That winter spirit brings us that snow, which is white, which is sacred to us as Indian people. But it also means that something in your life has to change or it's going to kill you. He said, and that's that golden liquid that fell from the moon, that was that alcohol. But what saved you is that you went back to your drum. That drum is your culture. That drum is your heart. That's where you really belong, is going back to the way that your grandparents had allowed you to experience those different ways of dealing with life, which was good, about our relationship with the earth and how we turn to it for help, the extraction of the medicines from the earth, and doing those kinds of lifestyles that allow us to subsist on our earth by the hunting and the fishing, the harvesting of the wild rice, and even doing the what we call majijiwan, is the taking of the maple syrup from the tree, and even the harvesting that we did when we planted. Well, we didn't have a huge garden. We did have a garden, and I don't remember really going to a store where we bought products from the store. Everything we needed was right there. Do you remember the first time my dad brought home a loaf of bread, though? And it was a Wonder Bread. I was used to biscuits, right? Sourdough biscuits. I did ask her too. I said, how come you always made them sourdough biscuits, Mom? And she says, well, we didn't have any refrigeration. When you mix up batter for pancakes, which we ate a lot of pancakes, and you let it set in the warm weather, when it got warm, it got sour. So you had your natural ingredients. I don't think a lot of people know that, but it's true. You got to let it sit there for a while and it turns sour. Yeah. But in the course of my meeting with Gegab Kamikan, that prancing horse, he said that we are a spiritual people. We exist spiritually because we equate ourselves with what's here for us. He says when we use that word in a way, Ma'gan, doesn't mean that you're related to your mother or your father, but you're related to everybody, right? Our nations are related. We're related to everything that's here on Earth. Everything. So there's probably millions of different species that live on the Earth. We're dependent on them. We know that now because we couldn't live without these transitions that are taking place that transform carbon monoxide and toxins and give us clean air. The trees are good for that. And in some sense, I share that viewpoint that sometimes when I talk to myself, I'm really talking to the spirituality of all life that exists within the area of that poplar tree.
Yeah.
Sometimes I suggest to people if you really want to experience spirituality, I said, and see what and how our species live, no matter what kind of species. Go to a tree and you'll see the birds there. They sing, they land in the branches and they'll sing to you. Or they might have a nest and you hear these little birds in there with their mouths wide open. Or you'll see different kinds of animals walk up to the tree and sit underneath it. I saw a fox run up a tree one time. And a lot of people said, foxes don't climb trees. I said, this one did. It took a running hop, but it jumped up on a branch and it stood there.
Oh, that's cool.
It was a gray fox. You know, he said, it's not that alcohol hasn't existed for years. He said it's a byproduct of the contaminants that were brought to us by this government that they call the United States.
Yeah.
When they took our land away, they put us on reservations and they fed us. They fed us commodities, right? Usually you got oatmeal, cheese, tuna, macaroni, cereals, sugar, lard, peanut butter, pork, beef, but it was all in cans. But they also gave us juice and yeast. So what did we do with that? We made our own home brew, right? Yeah. They would set up in crock pots and let their home brew for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And then somebody would come over and then they'd start drinking and they would drink until that home brew was gone. And sometimes that would be for days, right? He said that that had existed, but it existed only when it's the Western thinking people came here. We found ways to conjure up that liquid that made us feel good, right? The result made us feel good because, in a sense, we really had all this experience of living a life that was good in relationship to the earth, but all of a sudden now we're given something that took place of what we did. We depended on those commodities and we started to drink more and we started to depend on these handouts that the government gave to us, whatever they were. When we were talking, he said that there was four medicine men. He said one of them came from Canada, and they came down to a place called Bina, which is how they pronounce it now. That's an English pronunciation. We call it Bene, which means partridge in the Ojibwa language. But they came together there to talk about these these bad spirits that were coming onto the reservation. And it wasn't just the alcohol. It was the violence of men against women, men against their own children. Just a whole lot of um, straying away from our traditions and our culture because we were forced to. We were forced on these lands that to the um, government. They were wasted lands. There wasn't anything there. But they put us on a lake, Beach Lake, which is highly sandy. What they did with those reservation areas that were on the sandy shores is the BIA put them in trust lands and they leased them off to entrepreneurs or tourism started to sprout up and they built big resorts there. The resort owners would pay like $50 a year for huge amounts of land along the lakeshore. They made millions of money every year off of that, right? It was crazy. A lot of atrocities just happened to Indian people. And he said it's that alcohol was one of the spirits that came as a result of the non-Indian taking advantage of us, which we took advantage of that alcohol because it made us feel good for a while. But it was also a bad spirit. He said that that bad spirit, when it entered our body, he says, that creator given spirit that the creator has entrusted us with, he said it's only ours for a short while. And we have to treat it, to show reverence to it by just living a good life. That's that spirit that the creator gave to us. When you put that other spirit into our bodies like that, the spirit of that alcohol took over you. You have to understand that alcohol is a spirit too, and we have to show respect for it because it chased away creator spirit. Creator spirit didn't leave us. He says it stays on the periphery of you. It just hovers there, circles you until you make that choice to get rid of that other spirit. He said, but we need to go through a process in order to do that. He said, we need to go into shaking tent and to actually, he says this sounds kind of silly, but we have to honor that alcohol. You beat me. You beat me. But I'm not beaten down, right? There's ways that I can deal with you, and I want you to leave. We use that as same when we talk to that spirit, and we actually will also show it a reverence by feasting it, by go away, go away, go away now, and that feast that we give to it turns into a positive because not only are we feasting the departure from that alcohol spirit, we're feasting ourselves. We're showing reverence to this body that the Creator gave to us. That man from Canada, I saw it twice. The first time I saw that is I was watching that medicine man from Canada, and he was using that red willow sema, and he put it in his mouth. And I asked him later on, after the consul had done most of his talking, I said, I saw you put that asema in your mouth. He said, can you share with me why you do that? And he said, I do that because I have to show a reverence for this body. My first obligation is to this body. That's where my tobacco goes. I do that now every I follow I follow suit with that. So those ceremonies to honor that drug, that alcohol, they need to take place. I was talking to an elder lady about 3 weeks ago, and she came actually into my office here. She says, "You know what? I'm an alcoholic." And I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "Because they sent me to treatment and told me I'm an alcoholic." She says, "Richard, why can't I just go in and sit with my people and say, here I am. I'm this woman. I'm beautiful.
Yes,
Why do I have to say I'm an alcoholic?"
exactly. I'm glad she asked you that.
Said exactly. I use the 12-step model that Minnesota developed. That first step is admitting you're an alcoholic, right? And then they take that into the group therapy rooms, which that's the first work group that you're in. And you cannot leave that group until you admit that you're an alcoholic, right? Then you can move on to step two, came to believe, right? It doesn't work for the Indian people.
No,
And she says, I'm going to always believe I'm an alcoholic now.
yeah,
That when I go to my hospital on White Earth, one of the questions a doctor always asks me before they even ask me anything else is, do you drink? It's a stereotype. We're not all alcoholics. We're spiritual. We're spiritual people.
exactly. Eduardo Duran talks about diagnosis as a naming ceremony to speak about the power of those labels when they're placed on us and when we accept them, it's acknowledging even the spirit of that terminology, the power that holds to take that on as an identity.
Very powerful. Giga Kamikang, I was talking to Prancing Horse. He says, your maternal grandfather came to me because when you asked me if I would help you, I really asked them spirits to help you because I can't help you. I can pass that information on to you. Some spirits came to me and they asked me to give you that name of Wisak. That was grandfather's name. He said, he watches you and he sees that you have this ambition, this hope, and that Wisig is actually a medicine. He said, but it's a common product that we use every day in our life, and that's that pepper. Because pepper adds a flavor to the food that we eat, makes it tastier. But he said the real medicine is in the root because it produces a chemical that brings a sense of calmness to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wants you to build on that. And that's when I started to think, well, I really need to find out more about these medicines and not just the plants that we use, but what are these emotional and feeling medicines that we also need to experience? Because the medicine, as we defined it, is what makes us feel good, just like that alcohol is a medicine, or spirituality is a medicine. How we uh, come to experience emotions and how we express them in terms of feelings. Those are medicines also. So I wanted to find out more about that, and that's when I started the international visitation of a lot of different places and ended up in Little Black River Reserve where I met Peter O'Chise. Yeah, when he was 94 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a frail guy, and when I sat down next to him, he had a canvas tent, and he had his wife was a Cree woman, and they brought their two grandchildren with them. And I sat down with him, and I just felt a sense of comfort with him. I didn't even have to say anything. We just sat there watching the kids play. And we'd already been experiencing some of the ceremonies because there was 4 days starting in the morning and ending at night. And so finally I got up the courage to ask him. I said, Peter, what are we doing here? And he didn't answer at first. He said, this is the way we lived thousands and thousands of years. This is the way of our people. And that's how I got the name of my book, The Way of Our People.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
He says that way may never come back to us because of how the environment, the cultures are developing. Our technology is changing us even today, but we can still have these beliefs and practice our traditions and rituals so that we can live a good life. There's an alternative to these Western medicines that are probably more effective, he says, than Western medicines if we use them in the way that they're intended to be used.
Yeah,
And it's always showing an honor for those medicines. I hear a lot of people talk about trees and the medicines that are in the trees. The birch trees and poplar, the aspen, all trees have medicines. The bark is there. Even the common aspen tree that's been capitalized on by pharmaceutical now is they call it aspirin and they make millions of dollars off aspirin. Right? That's our medicine. Yeah, who knows what they'll do with our other medicines? I'm sure they're doing research on it just for that opportunity to make money off of what's been provided freely out there in the woods if you know where to go look for it. And experience from a historical standpoint on how to identify it and how to prepare it so that it can help us in a good way to help us heal. Yeah, a lot of medicines out there.
it's amazing that that was common knowledge at a time, that there was a time where, everybody would have knowledge of those common medicines.
Yeah,
And now today, so few do, and we have to go to stores to buy them, right?
yeah. That's changing though. That's changing a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah. Especially I see that with a lot of the Indian women around here. They talk about women are the gatherers of this medicine because they're life producing. Like even the common sage. Nowadays men and women go out and pick. But it used to be a medicine that the women would pick. Not to be territorial or anything, but it gives us a sense of that when we do harvest it, we're using it in a way to help us to develop a spiritual way of cleansing ourselves, to prepare ourselves to go into a ceremony, to prepare ourselves to go into a birth. Yeah, things like that. Our own lieutenant governor in Minnesota here, and this is public information, but she was at a birthing conference that I was at, and she talked about when she had her child that she had brought 5 different medicines with her to have her baby. And the nurse came into her room and she says, what are those? And she says, well, those are my medicines. And she said, well, you can't have them here. You'll have to send them home or we'll put them away and you can take them when you leave here. And Peggy said, well, these are medicines that are going to help me through my birthing process. I need them with me here. Yeah. And the nurse insisted, no, you can't not have those here. That's our policy. And Peggy said, I remained calm and silent, but I felt a deeper need to advocate for not only for myself, but for my baby, because my baby needed the medicines too.
Yes, of course.
So she asked the nurse, she says, can I speak to a patient advocate? And the patient advocate came to see her, and they allowed her to keep those medicines that are on her bedside. And it helped her. Her sage, her cedar, sweetgrass, she had a feather, and her tobacco. Just wonderful testimonies about how that medicine can help us in a spiritual way to go through what it is that we're going through.
Yeah, exactly. I had a similar experience with my first birth. And what's interesting is that those institutions are okay with all these other medicines being there, right? They're Western medicines, including these different painkillers and fentanyl and stuff like that. I was actually given an epidural that I didn't want, didn't really consent to, but I was forced into it. And what was interesting is that when I was having my second baby and I was really holding strong to having that baby on the land, before she came, I was in labor with her for 16 days before she came. And so there was a lot of work I was doing in that time. She had some assignments for me, and one of them was that the spirit of that fentanyl from the epidural from my first birth, it was wrapped around my midsection. So I had a doula, a friend of mine, who was guiding me through some, body focused indigenous therapy, and I saw that dark spirit was wrapped around my midsection, and I had to honor it, actually, what you spoke about with the spirit of alcohol, and I had to go out and put an offering to that spirit of the fentanyl to, acknowledge, even though I didn't want it, I didn't want the epidural, but the epidural was given to me. And so I had to acknowledge that medicine for what it did. It was like coming full circle with natural law, right? And making that offering to say, okay, this is for what you did during that time. And you have to leave now, and we're done, right? It was bye. And then that was able to release and make space for my second to come, which I was able to have her on the land and with all the natural medicines and with no medical interventions.
What a wonderful testimony, though. You speak so eloquently to our need for those medicines to be used in that way.
Yeah, it's like I think of another one of my elders, another Kitiaya from over here. She talks about, her past experience with alcohol as that she was trying to heal herself with the wrong medicine. That's how she says it.
Yeah,
And I really like how she put that because it's really about what is the relationship with that medicine and what are these medicines and how are we using them. Even with tobacco is such a sacred spiritual plant, and it can also be used in a way where it can be harmful, right? And the ways that it's also being processed within that you're a Western capitalist world. I think about that. And when I'm working with folks who are in recovery or working on their relationship with whatever that substance is that they've been using to try to heal themselves or help themselves or feel better in some way or not feel something that hurts really bad,
yep.
just thinking about those relationships because they're picking up some of the medicines that they know or that might have been shared with them, these medicines that can be really harmful, destructive, they take lives. And it's like I always think of it as how do we turn towards these medicines over here that are life-giving, these medicines like the sage, the cedar, using the tobacco in a good way, and that it's all about relationships with these different spirits and these energies. We have these medicines, like you're talking about, our traditional medicines that actually strengthen our relationship with the spirit that the creator gave us. And I remember learning from you way back in 2014, and I still remember that moment of sitting with you when you shared with me about the way that when someone's using a substance like alcohol, or as you mentioned today, there's a lot more going on with different drugs, and whether they're synthetic or partially synthetic, it doesn't matter. It's still a spirit, it's still an energy that you're bringing in. And that when they bring that in, their spirit steps aside. Like you were saying, it's always around, but they can't be in that body at the same time. And that was like a life changing moment for me to realize, whoa, yeah, this is what it is. And that's how I approach work with addictions. I don't believe in the terminology of addict or alcoholic, or I don't believe in that. I think of that, that someone's just using something to try to help themselves, to try to heal themselves or try to feel better in some way. And it's just a medicine that's harmful. It's a medicine that's causing hurt. And the other piece about it, and this I learned through listening to Eduardo Duran speak, is that often when people are using those substances to try to heal themselves or feel better or not feel something for a while, they aren't putting an offering out to it, right? Like when we think of our traditional teachings of reciprocity, we know when we harvest our traditional medicines, we know that there's that act of reciprocity where we put down an offering in exchange for that spirit coming in and helping us in some way, whether it's a smudge or a tea, or however we're using that medicine. But with these substances, people, I would say often, probably most of the time, are not putting offerings out to ask them for their help, right? And so there's also this piece of natural law that isn't taken care of there. And that was something I learned from Eduardo Duran. I heard him speaking live in southern Alberta some years back. And he was talking about even working with folks to put tobacco offerings out to their prescription medications, and that can actually help, because you're then talking to the spirit of that medication that you're taking. And it can also help kind of balance out some of the imbalanced energies that go into making those medications, because often they're made in you talk about the aspen being used even. Was that harvested in a way of respect for the spirit of that plant? Probably not, when it's being used to make Western medication. And then the way it's processed and the spirit of greed, capitalism, money, these different things that come in and influence the energy of those medicines. That's different than when we're just, like you say, out in the bush and we have that direct relationship, spirit to spirit, in that respect. So I think about all those things even as you're sharing, and I'm just so grateful that you shared those teachings with me, because it's such a powerful way to support folks and where they also know their own power with it. And they're not helpless or powerless in the face of an addiction. They're actually very powerful, very well people. They've just been turning to the wrong medicines, and perhaps in a way where the natural law hasn't been respected. So maybe that substance is taking from them in order to right that, to balance that, the take and the give, right?
You're very insightful because I think a lot of the medicines that we use, even life itself, it's all energy, right? Everything is based on energy. It starts at the moment of conception, and it ends when that conception passes on into the spirit world. It's time phased also. And if we look at drug addiction in that way, that it's also an energy and it's time phased. But you need some help. We all need help. I needed it. I have a friend that he's Vietnam War veteran. He's my age. He's still drinking yet to cope with what he experienced over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what takes away those dreams. That's what takes away those observations and experience the emotions of that, not being able to expend those energies that exist around feelings. Can't talk about this. Yes, you can talk about it. Because we're talking about it right now. A few years ago, I took an eagle feather and at the Prairie Island powwow. I asked 4 veterans to honor him by bringing him out into the powwow circle, the arbor. We placed one at each direction, one veteran, Vietnam War veteran, combat warrior. And they called him up, gave him that eagle feather. That made him feel so good. It's our culture working without the benefit that bad spirit gives to us, which is contrary to our creator giving spirit. It's natural for us, very natural.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And it's really nice to hear you share that story again of you and the drum and that dream that came to you, and all those things that came together to help you change your relationship with alcohol and let that go and leave that behind. As you know, when I was living in Minneapolis, I had that drum come into my life. And at the time, I was already out of my party life, but I was still drinking every now and then. Like I just have a drink here and there. I had a dream maybe a couple weeks after we had that ceremony and brought that drum to life. That drum was there and I was going to go sing at the drum, and then I drank a beer and I couldn't sing. My voice was gone. I knew that drum was coming to say, it's time for you to quit drinking. And I did. I did after that.
Mm-hmm.
If you asked me in my early teens, I'd be like, oh no, no way. I would never quit drinking. That's not even possible. But that was 15, 10 years ago. And that drum came and brought that to me. And I don't crave a drink or anything. It's like that relationship with that spirit changed. And my relationship with my spirit changed so much as well. And it's just knowing that that's that spirit and it doesn't have a place in my home or in my body or in my life.
That's great you had that experience because I equate that to what I always say, which a lot of people say is that the spirits are in charge. They insert a thought in your head. They won't talk to you directly. They put a thought up here. There was an Indian woman that came out of a visit with her psychologist, and she was really, really mad. She was running actually to the door, and I stopped her and I says to her, I says, what happened? And she says, oh, that psychologist opened a door I didn't want open, and I asked her if I could sage, and the psychologist asked me if I was on my moon, and I said I was on my moon. She said, well, then I can't allow you to sage. We're not supposed to do that when we're on our moon because you're considered to be so powerful. And I said, well, come in here. And I called her in my office. And I said, do you want a sage? And she says, I need it, Richard. I need to calm myself down.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, let's get out to sage here. And we saged together. Before she left my office, she says, I'm going to go do what I do best and let's go out and get drunk. I said, well, think about that as you get on the elevator. Think about what you just said and think about what you just did to counteract that thought. You said you purified yourself. That's where your thoughts need to go. And so she left, and I seen her a couple of weeks later, and she came in and she was smiling. And I said, did you go out and get drunk then? And she says, no. Sometimes our people are pretty rigid when it comes to that protocol about not smudging. But if we really need that smudge,
Yeah.
then let's do it. I won't tell on you.
And what a beautiful example of her reaching for the right medicine, the medicine that she knew that she needed, and then not needing to turn to
Yeah,
that other medicine that was causing harm because she was able to use the one she needed.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. And the spirits were good with it.
It is spiritual life giving of that sage and the smudge. But modesty when we say, lead a good life. Creator wants us to lead a good life. We can't always. But we develop a philosophy about life, and I think I shared with you my philosophy is based on 4 virtues is we share with what we have, we're kind to people, and we definitely need to be honest because it does bring us strength in what it is that we do with our life, right? Kindness, sharing, honesty, strength.
Yeah.
It works. Sometimes it takes a lot just to remain that intensely focused, but our medicines are there to help. Sweetgrass, bring those thoughts to me that are good. Sage tells us send those thoughts away that are bad for us right now. Confront them though. We need to talk about them. Otherwise, we develop negative coping mechanisms that may temporarily give us good feelings like that alcohol, but it's not forever. Even alcohol is energy, time phase, not meant to be in our body.
I really appreciate you sharing all of this. You just have so much wisdom, and it's such a powerful way to work with addiction for people to understand, like, okay, yeah, I was just using this to feel better for a while. They tried to take our medicines away from us, our traditional medicines, and I think that's one of the reasons that people turn to these other medicines that showed up, that
Yes.
were introduced and are now produced and manufactured and given to people in many forms, sometimes even through prescription.
When I went to Bear Butte a few days ago, the park rangers there were all American Indian people, all the way from the supervisor to volunteers and the rangers themselves. But one of them, we were sitting in the supervisor's office. They invited me in, and he says that I noticed one thing about our young people. They're coming here a lot more frequently now. He said, that is so intense for me to see our young people here walking up that hill. Sometimes they'll stay up there for days. There was a group here last week. There was five of them. One of them only lasted 12 hours. But at least he was here. But the other two stayed up there for a couple of days to offer that sense of their presence in such a sacred place that they could reach out to the spirits and ask for help. He says, I'm so amazed by that. He said, we're coming back.
Yeah, so many are coming back.
Yeah, we see it by our graduation rates from high school and colleges. I seen one graduate the other day who was wearing a bear skin on the graduation auditorium area. Who would allow that years ago? It's even controversy now, and some college graduates are not allowed to use the eagle feather as a tassel, right? Still being fought, but they do it anyway.
Good. Yes, exactly. Do it anyway. That's so powerful. I always think about um, how we actually still have so much compared to people who might be 1,000 years removed from indigenous ways of living, or 2,000. Um, so there's still so much, and it's beautiful to see people picking those medicines up again. And I believe these wisdoms and these knowledges are those that are needed to heal the world right now. Whether we're talking about environmental crises, or we're talking about addiction, we're talking about different health issues and crises. Again, there's so much wisdom and knowledge and medicine in these traditional ways to help us to heal ourselves, our communities, our families, and honestly, the world.
Yeah. One of the things that I seen up in Bear Butte was there was somebody left a medicine bag, and he was from Venezuela. Came there to offer himself as a presence in that spiritual place that he felt he needed to be at that time. There's a renaissance. I think that people are coming back to their originations because we're also deeply enriched by our language, our culture, our traditions, our rituals. And you're right. I think that's where we really need to focus on because of the world like it exists now. And it's going to get worse. Even our prophecies talk to that, speak to those conditions that are coming yet that we haven't even seen yet. My friend Darlene, that who adopted me, passed away. She said to me one time, she says, there's going to be a time in your life where it's going to cost money for you to drink water. Well, what do? Go to the store, we buy water.
Exactly. When you think about it, it's almost unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. I always say this to people that I encounter in my journey, actually my healing journey, renaissance of myself as being an Indian man, is that I just love it when I see our younger people returning to themselves. Empirically, we're educated by Western thought, Western philosophy. We have to meet mainstream in that level, but we can also be ourselves. That's the important thing. Yeah. Because the first thing that people see when you walk out of a building, yeah, well, there's an Indian person. Indian person. No, we're human beings. So are you. So, what I guess in effect, what I'm saying too, a simpler point is that you are our next leaders. Yeah. One day Richard's going to leave here. And I know that Carly's going to be there. Carry on the work.
I will.
Go on the road.
I will. But you're not allowed to leave anytime soon.
All right.
Hi, hi. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next full moon.